The chapel was small, tucked between fog-covered trees, as if the forest itself had grown around it to keep secrets. Inside, sunlight filtered through dusty, stained glass windows, casting warm colors across the pews, where guests sat in sharp, awkward silence. All eyes were on the altar. But not for the reason you'd expect. Everyone was whispering. Not with joy or wonder, but confusion, judgment, and questions they didn't dare ask aloud. There she stood. Amara Jones, a light brown woman in a modest, off-white gown, holding a bouquet of baby's breath and white peonies. Her back was straight, her jaw locked, but her hands trembled slightly. At first glance, it looked like any small-town wedding. Simple, humble, but something wasn't right. You could feel it. There was no music playing, no mother of the bride wiping tears, no ring-bearer giggling as he dropped the pillow, only a pulsing silence, and in the middle of that silence sat the groom, Donovan Blake, handsome, sharp-boned, early 30s. His black suit fit perfectly. His silver watch gleamed. He sat tall in a wheelchair, motionless, expression unreadable. There was no smile, no visible emotion. Just a calm, so practiced, it unsettled everyone in the room. To most people here, Donovan was just a reclusive man who had lived in the mountains for half a year. A gentle loner, the rumors said. Some thought he was dying. Others said he'd lost someone. But no one really knew. Except now, one person did. Amara. She had found out just moments ago, seconds before walking down the aisle. And now, she wasn't sure if this was a wedding or a setup. The guests whispered, "She doesn't look happy." Why is she crying? Didn't she say he was a writer? She's marrying someone in a wheelchair. It must be for money. Amara heard every word, though none of it was new to her. Her whole life, people had underestimated her, judged her by her skin, her bank account, or her silence. But this moment, it felt different. She had walked into this chapel with her heart steady, ready to build a quiet life with the only man who had ever made her feel safe. A man who didn't talk much, but listened deeply. Who gave her books instead of flowers. Who once wrote on a napkin, "Would you build peace with me?" And she had said yes, because for the first time, it didn't feel like a game. Until 5 minutes ago, when everything changed. Just before the ceremony, a journalist showed up, uninvited, slipped past the chapel staff and pulled a camera from his coat. "Is it true?" he asked the maid of honor in the hallway. "Is Donovan Blake really getting married out here? You know who he is, right? Blake Enterprises, missing CEO, $6 billion empire. The board's been scrambling for months." "Wait, what?" someone whispered. By the time Amara stepped out to walk down the aisle, the whisper had become a current. She had no idea. She had loved a man with scars and silence, not a billionaire in hiding. And now she stood there, bouquet in hand, realizing she had been living with a ghost. A man who had withheld everything. His name, his legacy, his power. But then, why had he proposed like a man who had nothing? Why had he asked for peace instead of promises? Her heart raced. Her throat closed, yet her feet stayed planted. From his seat, Donovan turned slightly to look at her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Amara searched for a flicker of guilt, an apology, even panic. But what she saw was something far more dangerous. Stillness. He knew she knew, and he wasn't going to stop it. Not the whispers, not the rumors, not the truth. It was as if this moment had been waiting. The priest cleared his throat and opened his book. "Dearly beloved." The words echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Amara's fingers tightened on the bouquet. Her knees wobbled. Somewhere deep in her purse was the vow she had written, tucked inside an old letter she'd meant to show him after the ceremony. But now she wondered, Was there ever going to be a moment after? Because nothing about this wedding felt like a beginning. It felt like a reveal, a curtain dropping on the man she thought she knew. And something inside her whispered, "You need to leave, now!" Right before the priest could say, "Do you take this man?" Amara turned. But not to run. Not yet. Instead, she looked towards the side hallway, where her purse waited. And with it, the letter from Donovan's mother. The letter that would explain why he had vanished. The letter that would change everything. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the chapel disappeared. Amara stepped into the quiet side room, her heels echoing on the stone floor. It was dimly lit, lined with books and old hymnals, a forgotten corner of the chapel no one used anymore. A place for retreat, for breathing. Her breath caught in her chest, sharp and stinging. Her fingers dug into the bouquet, knuckles whitening. Then slowly, she dropped it. The white peonies scattered across the floor like pieces of her certainty. She walked to the far bench and sat down, and for the first time in weeks let herself break. Months earlier, before the mountain, before the man in the wheelchair, before the chapel, there was nothing but noise. Sirens, traffic, overdue notices, landlords threatening eviction, calls from her little sister asking if dinner would be something more than rice and broth, messages from job recruiters who never replied after seeing her resume and her address. And then there were the memories of him, Jared, the charming, polished, well-dressed tech investor who had swept her off her feet 2 years ago, who had whispered big promises and even bigger numbers, who had convinced her to invest everything she had, her savings, her emergency fund, even the rent money, into a private crypto fund. By the time she realized it was a scam, the money was gone. So was he. But what stayed was humiliation. And a new understanding. The rich don't love, they leverage. After that, Amara had closed every door, not just to relationships, but to the idea of being seen at all. She wore invisibility like armor, worked side gigs, kept her head down, chose silence over confrontation, and stopped believing in anything that couldn't be measured in cash or calories. Until one day she saw a simple listing. Caretaker needed for remote property. Room and board included. Light housekeeping. Privacy guaranteed. There was no company name, no address, just a mountain zip code and a contact that only replied, "Come if you want quiet." At first, she thought it was shady, dangerous even. But she was broke and tired. And if someone needed a housekeeper in the middle of nowhere, even for weird reasons, that was someone she probably wouldn't have to talk to much. She packed her bags that night. The house sat on the edge of the mountains, where the air smelled like pine, and the cell signal died 2 turns before the driveway. A long gravel path led to a cabin too large to be called a cabin, but too old to be a mansion. It creaked like it had lived through wars. And maybe it had. And then there was him, the man in the wheelchair. He introduced himself only as Donovan. No last name, no explanation, no small talk. "I don't like being interrupted," he'd said, his voice even. "You'll have full access to the kitchen. Just don't touch the east wing." She remembered nodding, already planning her escape route in case things went weird. But they didn't. At least, not in the way she expected. The first week was silence. Donovan stayed in the study or the sunroom, never spoke unless necessary. He made his own coffee, cooked his own dinner. He didn't expect her to serve him, just to keep the space clean and the fridge stocked. The second week, he noticed her folding laundry in the wrong order. "You fold your socks like my mother," he'd said, with something that almost resembled a smile. She didn't respond. But she noticed that after that, he started leaving the socks for her to do. By the third week, she learned he liked Earl Grey tea at 4 p.m., didn't eat breakfast, and always read before bed. She stopped asking questions, but she noticed he started asking her. Nothing intrusive, just, "What book are you reading?" Or, "Do you prefer summer or fall?" And then one day, "Why do you flinch when someone talks about money?" She hadn't answered. But she hadn't walked away either. Over the months, something shifted. The silences between them stopped being walls. They became rooms. She didn't realize when she started looking forward to his footsteps, or wheels, down the hall, or when she stopped putting on makeup around him, or when she told him, softly, in the middle of slicing apples, that she hated elevators because they reminded her of the day she got locked in one with Jared. He didn't pity her. He just handed her the cinnamon, and she didn't fall in love with him, not all at once. It was smaller than that. She started missing him when he wasn't in the room. And then, one evening, under the stars, wrapped in blankets on the front porch, he asked her, "If this house had nothing but books and wind, would you still stay?" She'd looked at him, really looked. "No money? No last name," he said. "Just me?" And she had whispered, "Yes." She thought that was it. That she had finally outrun her past. That someone had finally chosen her without trying to buy her. She hadn't known. He was choosing her without telling her who he really was. Back in the chapel's side room, Amara pulled open her purse. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Her phone, maybe? An escape. But instead her fingers brushed against aged paper. The letter, old, faded, edges frayed. The one Donovan had once told her was from his mother. She'd never read it. She thought it was private. But now something told her to look. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands, and as her eyes scanned the first few lines, her breath caught again. This letter wasn't a diary entry. It was a final request, and as her eyes filled with tears, Amara realized Donovan had never lied to her out of pride. He had hidden out of grief. The wind in the mountains didn't whisper. It remembered. It whistled through cracks in the wood, breathed under the floorboards, and rattled windows like someone trying gently to be let in. At first, the sound unnerved Amara. She wasn't used to a place being so alive and yet so still. But over time, she realized the house wasn't haunted. It was attentive. Like Donovan, each day started the same, not with alarms or traffic or blaring news, but with silence. Crisp, golden silence. Amara would rise early, light the stove, and heat water for tea. By the time the kettle sang, Donovan would roll into the kitchen, dressed as if he were meeting a boardroom, even though there was no one to impress but the birds. He'd pour his own tea, nod once in greeting, and disappear into his study with a book in one hand and his reading glasses in the other. They barely spoke for the first few weeks. And yet, nothing ever felt cold. Amara learned that Donovan had a precise rhythm to his day. 8 vamos a.m. Tiu, 9 bound a.m. to noon, reading or work. 12:30 p.m. Light lunch, never heavy meals. Afternoons, writing letters, reading philosophy, staring out into the trees. Evenings, piano practice. Soft, hesitant, like he was relearning something he'd once forgotten. She never asked who the letters were for, or why he never sent them, and he never asked about the scar on her left wrist, or why she sometimes flinched at sudden kindness. It was an agreement, unspoken, but respected, until one day it wasn't. It was a Tuesday. Cloudy. The kind of day where even the trees seemed unsure of themselves. Amara was dusting the old bookshelf in the east hallway, the one she wasn't supposed to touch, when a name on a book spine caught her eye. Blake International Holdings, Private Memoirs. Her stomach twisted. She didn't open the book, didn't even move it. But she knew the name. It was the same one that had been trending months ago on financial news sites. The CEO who'd vanished, the sister taking over, the lawsuit. She tucked the book back into place with trembling fingers, as if afraid it would bite. When she returned to the kitchen, Donovan was already seated, waiting. "Did you go into the East Wing?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't casual either. Amara didn't lie. I was just dusting. I didn't open anything. He stared at her for a long moment, then quietly said, That part of the house is filled with old ghosts, not mine. She nodded. He didn't speak of it again. But that night, the piano was louder, sharper, full of keys that didn't resolve. A few days later, a package arrived at the gate. Donovan never received deliveries, but that morning, a courier appeared, flustered, clearly not used to mountain roads, and handed her a sealed white envelope. She brought it inside and placed it on the table. Donovan glanced at it, then went very still. "Who is it from?" she asked, before she could stop herself. His jaw tightened. "My sister." He didn't elaborate, but something shifted after that. He stopped reading in the afternoons, stopped writing. He spent more time staring out the window, fingers tapping on the wood. Amara never asked. But that night, she left a tray at his study door. Warm bread. Soup. Chamomile. When she came back in the morning, it was gone. The next evening, he knocked once before entering the kitchen. "I'm not good at apologies," he said. "You didn't do anything," she replied. He looked at her for a long time. "Not yet," he said. It was the first time he sat with her during tea. They talked about things that didn't matter. Whether cats could miss people. Whether dreams meant anything. Whether anyone ever really chose the life they were living. Then he asked, "If you could be invisible for a day, what would you do?" She thought about it, and then told him the truth. "I'd walk into the lobby of a 5-star hotel, and I'd stand there, because every time I tried to before, someone always stopped me." He didn't laugh. He didn't pity. He just said, "The next time, take me with you." From then on, something changed. Donovan started writing again. Not letters, but short notes left around the house. "There's extra tea in the cupboard. The stars are bright tonight. Look west. I left a story unfinished in the piano bench. You might like it." Amara never wrote back, but she started leaving him questions. "What's your favorite place you've ever been? Do you believe in second chances? If someone hurt you once, would you trust them again?" He never answered them aloud. But somehow, she always got her answers. One evening, just before the leaves turned gold, he told her, "You make this place feel real." And for the first time in a long, long while, she believed she was too. Autumn in the mountains came quietly. There were no parades of color, no dramatic chills, just a slow turning, green to gold, warm winds shifting cooler, the scent of wood smoke drifting between pine needles. Amara began baking more. Not because Donovan asked, but because it filled the house with something soft. She'd hum to herself in the kitchen. Some days he'd linger longer in the doorway, pretending to read, pretending not to listen. She never called him out on it, just passed him a plate without a word. And sometimes, he'd leave a folded napkin beside the sink the next morning with just one word on it. Perfect. They had fallen into a rhythm that felt almost too easy. She still didn't know much about his past. He still didn't know everything about hers. But somehow, it felt like both of them had made a quiet agreement. Let's not ask, let's just be here. And that worked. Until one afternoon, it didn't. It was late October. A storm was building over the western ridge, wind curling under the eaves. Amara was walking back from the garden with herbs when she saw Donovan on the front porch, staring into nothing. His wheelchair parked beside him, his legs stretched out stiffly, a rare sight. He didn't hear her approach. "Storm's coming," she said. He nodded. "Your legs okay?" she asked gently. He looked down at them, then at her, and said, "They're not the problem." She didn't press, just set the herbs down. Then softly, "Do you ever think we're just hiding from the world up here?" He looked at her finally, really looked. "Sometimes I think the world never gave us a place to begin with." She sat beside him. "I'm tired of running," she said. "So stop," he said simply. Her eyes met his. "You first." The next morning, Amara found a small stack of newspapers by the fireplace, all dated over the past year. She recognized the headlines. Stories about a missing CEO, a power shift in a major corporation, lawsuits, accusations, silence. She flipped through them slowly. None of them mentioned Donovan by name. But his absence was the story. At the very bottom of the stack was an old photograph, creased and faded. Donovan and a woman with silver hair. Her smile was radiant. Her arm rested on his shoulder, and his head tilted slightly toward her, like he didn't know it. But he needed her. On the back, scribbled in ink, "If she loved me when I had nothing, maybe someone else could too." The date below was from 5 years ago. That evening, when Donovan returned from his walk, Amara didn't pretend. She asked, "Why me?" He blinked. "Why what? Why did you let me into your world?" She paused. "Why not pick someone safer? Someone who already knows how to smile at the right people, dress the part, lie on cue." Donovan sat down, his expression unreadable. "Because I've already met those people. They knew how to pretend, but none of them ever looked me in the eye the way you did, like I was just a man with broken parts." She said nothing. He added, "You never tried to fix me, and you never asked me to fix you." That's when she realized he had been watching her heal too. A few days later, it snowed for the first time. Thin, fragile flakes that melted on the porch but clung to the railings. Amara stood at the edge of the deck, wrapped in an old sweater, staring at the way the trees held their breath. Donovan approached quietly, holding something in his hand. It wasn't a box, not a velvet pouch, not a ring. Just a piece of paper folded twice. She looked at it, confused. He handed it to her without a word, then turned and walked back into the house. Amara unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Would you build peace with me? No titles, no money, no promises we can't keep. Just you, me, and mornings that don't feel like regret." "Dee?" She stared at it for a long time. And then she smiled. That night they didn't toast champagne or call friends. They didn't even say the word marriage. But Amara moved her things from the guest room to his, and that was enough. In the days that followed, they kept things simple. She taught him how to braid bread dough. He taught her how to play 3 chords on the piano. They started building a small greenhouse behind the cabin. Donovan began writing again. Not just notes, but full chapters, journals, ideas, letters he might never send. He let her read one. Just one. It was called "The Woman Who Walked In Without Asking Why." Then, one morning, as they sat drinking tea by the window, Donovan spoke, casually but firmly. "There's something I need to do." She looked at him. "In the city," he added. She waited. He continued. "I've been gone too long. Some things need to be finished." Amara didn't ask what. She only asked, "Do I come with you?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet, but soon." She nodded. He reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "But first I want to marry you. Quietly, before the noise returns." And just like that, the man who had vanished from the world was about to return to it. But this time, not alone. The week that followed felt like a dream too delicate to touch. They didn't make grand announcements. There were no engagement parties, no social media posts, no diamond rings catching the light. Just 2 people, quietly building something real. They planned the ceremony for the small chapel down in the town valley, a place Donovan remembered from when he was a boy. It was humble, surrounded by trees, with creaky pews and stained glass windows that filtered in light like secrets. "I don't want anything big," he told her. "Just us, a few witnesses. Peace." Amara smiled. "Then let's keep it sacred." But even the quietest beginnings have echoes. The first crack came with the arrival of Veronica. Not physically, not yet. It started with a letter, a cream envelope, no return address, tucked inside the mailbox on a Tuesday morning. Amara found it while collecting the local paper. At first she assumed it was another invoice or mistake. But when she handed it to Donovan, his expression changed. He didn't open it, just stared at it. "It's her," he said. Amara didn't have to ask who. That night, he was quieter than usual. And that was saying something. He didn't eat much. Didn't touch the piano. Barely touched her hand when she reached across the table. "She knows," he finally said. Amara tilted her head. "Knows what? That I'm here? That we're engaged? That I'm trying to disappear?" Amara said nothing. She knew better than to interrupt grief when it was unraveling itself. "Veronica doesn't believe in half measures," he added. "She'll come, not to congratulate us, to test us." The next day, Donovan met with the town registrar and quietly filed the marriage request. Amara picked out a simple ivory dress from a second-hand shop. They agreed on no flowers, no photographer, no speeches. Just the vows, exchanged beneath the morning light and the promise of a quiet life ahead. But even as they finalized the details, Amara felt something shift. A letter arrived for her. No return name, just a stark, typed message. "If you think love makes you an heir, think again. The world doesn't bend for maids with pretty smiles." She read it twice, then tore it into pieces and dropped it in the stove fire. But something in her had already begun to tighten. Veronica didn't show up in person, not yet, but her presence was felt. Phone calls to the registrar were made asking for more information on the wedding. A news blog posted a rumor about Donovan being spotted in the mountains. And one night, as Amara walked into town for groceries, she noticed two men in suits across the street watching the chapel. It wasn't fear that crept in, not yet. It was a feeling Amara knew too well. Being measured, not as a bride, not as a woman in love, but as a threat. Donovan tried to shield her from it. He kept his voice steady, his eyes calm, even as the pressure mounted. He told her, "We'll be fine. The world can knock, but it doesn't get to come in unless we open the door." And she believed him. She wanted to believe him, but she also knew every door has a key, and Veronica knew how to pick locks. 2 days before the wedding, a box arrived. Amara wasn't expecting anything. Donovan hadn't ordered anything. The label had no sender, but it was addressed to Miss Amara Jones, soon-to-be. Mrs. Donovan Blake. Inside the box, a pair of designer heels, a wedding veil laced with pearls, a note handwritten in looping cursive. "You may wear white, but you'll never be one of us." Amara stared at the items for a long time, then calmly closed the box. Later that night, Donovan found it in the fireplace, heels and all, burning slow but certain. He said nothing, but when he sat beside her afterward, he whispered, "After this, you'll never be alone again." And for a moment she believed it. The morning was too perfect. Blue skies stretched without flaw, and the wind carried a warmth that felt more like early spring than late autumn. The chapel sat quiet under golden trees, dressed in sunlight. For anyone watching, it looked like the beginning of something sacred. But Amara felt the tension long before the vows began. She had slept in a separate room the night before. A quiet tradition, but also something she had requested. Something had tightened in her chest since the letters, the box, the glances in town. She needed space to breathe, but now, standing in the back room of the chapel in her simple ivory dress, her hands refused to stop shaking. Donovan was already seated at the altar, calm, still, unreadable as always. The guests, though few, were exactly as expected. The mayor's wife, 2 old friends of Donovan's mother, the chapel caretaker, a quiet florist who had insisted on adding 1 vase of lilies for memory, and 1 empty seat in the back row. Amara's eyes kept drifting to it. She didn't know why. The music began. Soft piano chords, recorded from Donovan's own playing, filled the air. It was a melody Amara knew well, one he had practiced on quiet nights when he didn't know she was listening. As she stepped into the chapel, arms bare, chin lifted, She heard the whispers before she even reached the aisle. "That's her. She's beautiful. I heard he's sick, maybe dying. She's marrying into billions, you know. Or maybe just taking her shot before he goes." The words didn't hurt like knives. They hurt like cold water, shocking, not fatal, but enough to remind her. This was no longer the mountain. This was the world again. She reached the front. Donovan looked up at her and smiled. Soft. Real. And for a moment, just one, it almost felt okay again. The priest began his welcome. But before he could continue, the chapel door creaked. Every head turned. A woman entered. Tall, dark gray suit. Hair pulled back like steel. Eyes that scanned the room like they owned it. Veronica. Amara froze. She had seen pictures. But seeing Veronica in person was like watching a statue step into real time. Beautiful, sharp, and terrifying. Veronica didn't sit. She walked straight down the aisle, heels silent on the floor. She stopped right at the front row, turned to face the priest, and held up a document. "I apologize for the interruption," she said smoothly, "but this ceremony is proceeding under false pretenses." Gasps filled the room. Donovan's hand tightened on the armrest of his chair. "Veronica," she ignored him. "This man, Donovan Blake, is a public figure who disappeared from his role as CEO of Blake International under questionable circumstances. He has since been residing in this town under an assumed identity, and now, under emotional manipulation, is attempting to marry a woman who—" She turned, eyes locking on Amara. "Has neither background, nor standing, nor any vetting process whatsoever." Amara stood still. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't the humiliation. It was the look in Veronica's eyes. Cold certainty. As if she were stating facts, not attacking. As if Amara were a checkmark on a file, an obstacle, a PR problem. Donovan finally stood, not literally, but he pushed his chair forward facing his sister. "This is not your place," he said. Veronica stepped aside, like a queen allowing her knight one move before ending the match. "I have legal documentation," she said. "The company is watching. The board is watching. Do you really think they'll let this go unchallenged?" The priest cleared his throat, clearly unsure whether to continue. Amara looked down at her bouquet. White peonies and baby's breath. They felt heavier now. She turned to Donovan. He was looking at her, eyes wide, wounded but open. Waiting. Not for her to explain, but to choose. And suddenly, the weight of everything, the letters, the fire, the footsteps, the world pressing at the door, collapsed on her chest. "I can't," she whispered. Donovan's face broke. "Amara." But she stepped back. "I'm sorry." She turned, walked down the aisle, not running, not crying, just walking, back straight, chin lifted. The silence behind her was thunderous. Outside, the sun still shone, but it didn't feel warm anymore. She walked past the trees, past the parked cars, until she found the bench under the old maple tree beside the chapel. And she sat there, in her wedding dress, alone, not because she wanted to be, but because she had to remember who she was before she could ever say, "I do." The wind had changed. Amara sat on the weathered bench beneath the old maple tree, her fingers trembling against the lace of her dress. Somewhere in the distance, the chapel doors had closed again. The ceremony was over. Or maybe it had never really begun. Her bouquet lay on the ground beside her, forgotten. For a while she did nothing, just sat. Not as a bride, not as a symbol, but as a woman caught between truths. She had spent her life learning to read rooms, figuring out when to speak, when to disappear, when to make herself smaller just to survive. Today she hadn't been asked to shrink. Today she had been watched, evaluated, dissected, and all the old ghosts, the ones she thought she'd buried on that mountain, came back like they'd never left. "You don't belong. This world wasn't made for you. You're here by mistake." Veronica hadn't said those words out loud, but she didn't need to. The leaves above rustled, scattering fragments of gold light across her lap. She closed her eyes, and in the stillness, a voice returned. Not Donovan's, not Veronica's, not her own, but soft, paper-thin, one she hadn't heard or remembered until now. "I left something in your purse," Donovan had said. From her. She always said, "The right letter at the wrong time still saves the day." Her hands moved without thinking, reaching for the small clutch resting beside her. She opened it. Tucked between her vows and a pack of tissues was a folded envelope. Worn. Yellowed. The handwriting familiar, though not recent. From his mother. Amara hesitated, then unfolded the letter. "To whoever is reading this, and I hope it's someone with a kind heart. My son doesn't trust easily. He was born into power, not love. I did what I could. I tried to teach him softness. But in a world where wealth makes walls, softness gets lost. If you're holding this, it means he let you in. And if you're scared, I understand. I was scared too, when I became a Blake by marriage. I thought I had to become someone else to survive. But the truth is, survival isn't about changing. It's about remembering who you were before they told you who to be. So I ask just one thing. Don't run because they doubt you. Stay because you believe in you. And if you can believe in him, too. With love, Elise." Amara didn't cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because something inside her had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from defeat, but from resolution. She folded the letter slowly, pressed it against her chest, and breathed. Not for Donovan, not for Elise, not even for the wedding, but for herself, for the girl who once walked out of a hotel lobby after being told, "This isn't your place." For the woman who had to convince herself that love without power was still real. For the version of her that almost believed Veronica today. She stood. Inside the chapel, the guests were beginning to rise, uncertain what to do next. Donovan hadn't moved. He was still at the altar, hands folded, shoulders still, like a soldier waiting for a verdict. When the doors opened again, the wind followed Amara in. Every head turned. She didn't wear her bouquet. She didn't smile. She just walked, slow, steady, down the aisle again. But this time, not as a bride fulfilling a schedule. This time as a woman making a choice. Veronica looked furious. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. Donovan looked up. And for the first time in hours, his eyes held something more than pain. They held hope. Amara stopped in front of him. "I left because I couldn't breathe," she said softly. "But I'm here now because I finally can." Veronica stepped forward, ready to interrupt. But Amara raised a hand. "I don't care about your paperwork, or your legacy, or your empire." She turned to Donovan. "I care about the man who showed me peace, before I even believed I deserved it." The room went silent. Then she added, "So if this vow still stands, without rings, without titles, without cameras, I'll take it." Donovan blinked, then smiled, then whispered, "It still stands." The room was still. Veronica said nothing, though you could feel the weight of her silence. The kind that doesn't retreat, but hovers, waiting for someone else to flinch. But Amara didn't flinch. She stood at the altar, her voice calm, her back unshaken. Not because she wasn't scared, but because for the first time in her life, she refused to be made small in a room built to contain her. Donovan extended his hand, and this time, when she took it, the chapel exhaled. No priest spoke, no music played. But something sacred began anyway. "Donovan," Amara began, "I didn't come here for status, or security, or to be saved." She turned slightly, addressing the crowd now, not just him. "I came because when I met you, you didn't try to fix me. You didn't ask me to change. You didn't flinch at my silence or question my strength." She paused. "You didn't love me for the part of me that fit your world. You loved me for the part I was still trying to accept in myself." She faced him again. "So if this whatever it becomes can stay honest even when it's hard, then yes, I do. Donovan's jaw tightened. Not with tension, but the pressure of holding emotion still. He looked at her, eyes glassy, then glanced toward Veronica. And for the first time since she entered the chapel, he addressed her directly. You always said no one outside this family could carry the Blake name with dignity. He turned back to Amara. But she didn't just carry it, she redefined it. He looked to the room. I've had money, I've had power. But peace? I didn't know what that felt like until she walked into a house and didn't ask to belong. He turned to Amara once more. And if you'll have me, fully, without the titles, without the shadows, then I swear every door they close on you, I'll kick open beside you. A beat of silence. Then, gently, Amara nodded and whispered, Then we walk through together. The priest, clearly unsure of his role now, opened his book again. But Donovan raised a hand. No need, he said. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a slip of folded paper, and tore it in half. The room gasped. Amara realized what it was, the marriage license. No fanfare, no symbolism, just a quiet rebellion. He turned to the priest. We'll sign it again, on our own terms. As the ceremony closed, Veronica turned and left without a word. She didn't win, but she didn't fight either, because there was nothing to fight against when truth stood on its own. Outside, the day hadn't changed. The wind was still cool, the sky still clear. But as Amara stepped out of the chapel, hand in Donovan's, she knew something had changed in her. They didn't host a reception, but they walked. Through the town, through the trees, back up the gravel path to the cabin where it all began. And with each step, Amara didn't think of the silence in the chapel, or the weight of legacy, or the fire she'd burned in the fireplace with that box. She thought of a single napkin, folded neatly, left beside a teacup months ago, with one word on it. Perfect. That night they sat by the fire, not in gowns or suits, just in sweaters and socks, legs tucked under a shared blanket. Donovan handed her a leather-bound notebook. It was blank. What's this? She asked. He smiled. Our vows, he said. The real ones. The ones we write tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that. Amara opened to the first page. She didn't write anything, but she did whisper, You don't have to save me. Donovan leaned in. I know. I just want to stand beside you while you save yourself. And with that, they closed the day. No titles, no cameras, no script, just truth. And two people who had finally chosen each other, without needing to ask for permission. He just wanted to stand beside her while she saved herself. That's not a fairy tale. That's what real love looks like, when you're not asking to be rescued, but to be respected. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes love should be earned, not bought.